Now we're going to show you how to use two new steps, Create Object and the Find Object step. Let's add the Create Object step to the scenario that works with the authors structure. Let's create the test table structure with a field for the ID and 3 other field strings. Go back to the scenario and configure the Create Object step to create a new object in the test table structure. A new object's ID can be generated automatically or manually. In either case, the generated ID must be recorded somewhere. We can use a context variable for that. Let's add a link type context variable, new obj ID, to our new structure. Next, specify the context variable in the step as a field, where we'll write the generated ID. Then we can use it like a regular link. After that, in the field mapping section, choose what to write in the new object's fields. For example, field 1 will contain the first name, field 2 the last name, and field 3 the year of birth. Of course, we can use more complex expressions and use JavaScript to calculate expressions. That was covered in the previous video. To test the object, copy the ID and run it through the debug panel. The logs show that everything worked well. Now look at the test table structure, and we see a new object with all fields correctly filled in. In the logs, we see the value of the context variable, which stores the new object's ID. If we run the object again, a second object will be created with a new random ID. In the step settings, if we choose the option to create an object with a manually set ID, for example, let's use my_new obj, and run the object again, we'll see that everything worked. The context variable now has the value my_new_obj, and an object has been created with that ID. If we run the object through the scenario again, no new object is created because an object with that ID already exists. Now try to create an object with the same ID, but with the fields filled in differently. For example, simply enter the constant 1000 in field 3. Let's look at the value. The object has changed. Don't forget, we can always check an object's version history. We can see the previous value, the new value, who made the change, what scenario was used, and what step was used. We may find that we often need to create a unique object for a given pair. We call that intersection. We might, for example, need to associate a user with a particular book author. Let's create a new variable, user_ID, with the user's ID as a value. Then we need to create an object. Its ID will combine our 2 values, but will be limited to 32 characters. To do that, we need a special function called hash. And to use it, JavaScript processing must be enabled. It's a function that converts any string into a unique string of 32 characters. A compound string of 2 IDs becomes the argument. Because we're using JavaScript, we must use JavaScript syntax and quotes. For example, if we pass a long string of 50 to 60 characters, it will be reduced to a unique string of just 32 characters. And there's our created object. Everything is fine. Let's try to run the scenario again to make sure that no new object is created. We still have the same object, and no new object was created. Okay, we've finished with the Create Object. Now let's move on to the Find Object step. We'll use the authors structure, where we'll add 4 new fields to demonstrate the 4 find step modes. The fields will be an array link to the books structure, 2 number type fields, and either an array or string field. It can be either. Now we've created 4 new fields. For debugging purposes, copy the ID and add the Find Object step to the scenario. We'll search the adjacent structure, Books. Note that by default, the result will be stored as an array link. Now we store the result in a specific field, the one we just created. In the second tab, we specify the filters, meaning the criteria we'll use to search for books. In this case, we specify that we're searching for books with an author field that match the object ID in our scenario. In this case, our search result returns 3 books whose author field contains a link to Leo Tolstoy. The second option is Count, which gives the total number of objects that match the specified conditions. We type the result into the number field. Check the result. It says 3, and everything's correct. Theoretically, we could just calculate the length of an array we found in the first step, but for the sake of illustration, we'll do it this way. Next, we can sum the fields that contain numbers or decimals. Let's just add up the numerical value of the years of publication and store the result in a separate field as a number. Okay, let's test it. Look at the object and the result is 5,606. Let's look at the year of publication. It's probably correct. The first step gave us the correct result by adding the 3 values. The last mode makes an array out of fields. For example, let's make an array, in this case a string of book titles separated by commas, and we store the result in the 4th field, which we've called Search Array. Run a check and everything looks good. There's our array. In this case, a comma-separated string. In the next video, we'll look in more detail at how to use arrays and array links. We'll see you there.